Alright, today I'm going to show you how I adjust the valves on my XR650. First, seat comes off. 2 bolts in the back here. Mine are 10mm. Take those out, pull the seat back, set that aside. Okay, the next thing to come off is the tank. Before you can take that off, you got to take off the radiator shrouds. You're going to need a large Phillips head screwdriver. There's 2 screws right here. And then the third one is a 10mm bolt. In order to get the tank off, there's 2 bolts, one on each side. They're 10mm. Take those out. Turn your fuel off and disconnect the hose from the carburetor. Once you've disconnected the fuel hose, pop that clip off, and now the tank will lift right off. Set this aside. You'll need to remove your spark plug. This takes a 5/8 plug wrench. Alright, next thing I do is take off this plug right here on the side case. This allows you to line up the flywheel behind this case with the mark on the engine case to set top dead center, so that way you can adjust the valves. Now, I believe these plugs are steel and aluminum case, so they kind of self-tighten over time. So instead of just trying to loosen it by hand, usually like take a rubber mallet and give it a little crack. It kind of breaks that stiction it has. Just like that. So the next thing we want to do is get the piston at top dead center on the compression stroke. That ensures both intake and exhaust valves are closed, and the cams are on the small base circle. There's a mark on the flywheel. It's a T, and I'll show you that in a minute. But the first thing I do is you got to find the compression stroke. With the spark plug out, what I like to do is put the transmission in 5th gear, and then you can rotate the rear tire easily, and it'll roll the engine over. You take your thumb, or any finger for that matter, and try to block the spark plug hole, and when you feel air come up out of the spark plug hole, you know that that's the compression stroke. Because if it wasn't, you would be on the exhaust stroke, and you would be pushing air out the valve instead of the spark plug hole. So that's what you do. That's how I do it. I can feel the air rushing up past my finger because there's only a small opening. And now I know that right now we are on the intake stroke. We are on the compression stroke. So I'm going to go around, and I'm going to keep going. Should be on the downstroke. Now I'm coming back up, and I can hear the air passing through the exhaust, and that click you heard right there is just the valves. The cam depresses the valves, and the spring pressure is high enough where the cam, once it gets past depressing the valve all the way, it wants to roll over on that downward ramp of the cam, so that spring pressure helps actually roll the engine over further, and it makes that noise. I'm going to keep going. Now I know I'm approaching the compression stroke. I can feel the air blowing out the spark plug. So I'm going to bring the camera down here and show you guys how to set the flywheel to the T mark. Okay, so now that we're on the compression stroke, I'm going to slowly roll the engine forward and look for the T mark. Is that it? That is not the T mark. That is an F. Do you see it? The T mark is right after that. That's the T mark. Now, the manual, Honda manual, has you removing this entire cover. And there's a witness mark. There's a witness mark on the case up here with this cover removed. But this witness mark in this hole, top and bottom, is the same witness mark. I've always adjusted my valves using this plug removed. So, and you can see the T right there. It's laying on its side, so it's horizontal right here. So now that you have it set to the T mark on the compression stroke, both intake and exhaust valves are ready to be adjusted. So in order to access the intake valves, you have to remove this cover. This takes an 8mm socket. Make sure you save your O-ring. Okay, this is your valve tappet right here. The tappet is what makes contact with your valve stem. And this has a double rocker. Both of these rocker arms are integrated all as one, even though you can't see that. So the clearance, the proper clearance for the intake valve is 0.15 millimeter. And if you don't own a set of metric feeler gauges, which I highly recommend you get a set of metric feeler gauges, just makes it a lot easier. If all you got is standard, that's approximately 6/1000 of an inch, 0.006 inches. Okay, so now that we know we're on the compression stroke, we should see clearance underneath the tappet. So you just push this under there. And these hasn't, I don't recall how long it's been since I've adjusted these, so these are tight. So as the engine wears, the valve into the valve seat, your clearance is reduced, and eventually your clearance goes away. And that's why we adjust the valves on these, because eventually if you keep running it, you have no more clearance and your intake valves hold open a little bit, and then you could burn a valve. Besides losing performance, you could ruin your engine. So for this part, if you've got no clearance like I have, first thing you're going to do is take a 10 millimeter wrench, and you're going to loosen this lock bolt. Yes, that seemed tight. And then you can back off the screw, the tappet adjuster, to the point where you have clearance. Now, you got to bring it back in ever so slowly and feel the drag on the feeler gauge. Right there. And of course I moved it. Now here comes the hard part. You just want to snug this back up without moving the tappet at all. Just snug it up a little bit and then recheck the clearance. If it changed and it's too tight, you get to redo it over. Like that is. And also, just so you know, something else that will affect the drag on your shim here. If you push down hard with this screwdriver through this evolution, it will feel like it's tight, but it won't be. It'll be just your force pushing down on the rocker tip here. Right there. Let's try snugging it. Feels pretty good. Alright. Alright, so once you've set your clearance, you've snugged it, you've checked it, you got to torque that adjuster nut. 216 inch-pounds, or also known as 18 foot-pounds. Okay, now that you've set the torque on your lock nut, you check it again. Feels good to me. We'll move on to the next one. This one's a little more challenging because the carburetor's in the way. Nonetheless, of course, I'm running out of daylight, so I put a shop light on this. Hopefully you guys can see. Somewhere. There it is. It's tight. Okay, you gotta do it from this side. Just makes better sense. Snug it. Torque it. Check it. Okay. Feels good to me. I'm getting that feeler gauge under that tappet and all the way through to the other side. Can you see that? You got to make sure you're getting through. Okay. Now, if you're wondering, maybe you think you set it a little too loose, you're not quite sure, you can add some shims. Maybe, see here, my thinnest one is 0.002. Let's see. I could add the 0.002 to the 0.15 and see if it'll fit under there. If it does, then I know I've set them too loose. Now it's not easy because this thing's about as thin as tin foil. The trick is to kind of get some oil between them. Some people will argue that it'll change your reading, but it's not enough really to affect that. You're just looking for a thin smear on the surfaces of these two to help bring them together like that. And now I'll try this one. Doesn't want to go. Then I'll try that one. Come on. Doesn't want to go. So there you have it. Now you've just double checked that you got the right clearance. And I'll try it one more time for good measure. Slips right under there, nice and smooth. We're all done with the intakes. I'm going to put the cover back on, and then I'm going to set up on the exhaust side and do the same thing, except for there's a different clearance number. So here's the exhaust valves, and you've got the radiators on the right and then the head, so there's not a lot of room here to work with. The process is exactly the same on the exhaust side. You don't change the engine position once you're at top dead center, and you can adjust the valves on that T-mark compression stroke. Both intake and exhaust valves can be adjusted at that position. You do not roll the motor over, do anything. Now, there's not enough room for me to show you, but you gotta believe me, the process is the same. The only difference is on the exhaust side of this XR, the clearance is a little bit wider. Can you read that? It's 0.2 millimeters. Okay, so it's a little tight. For what it's worth, I'm probably gonna leave it. So there you have it. That's how you adjust your valves. Well, we're right out of daylight. So I'm going to put this back together. Reverse order that I showed you how to take it apart. If you guys have any questions about how to set the valves on this bike, I always recommend get a manual. You cannot go wrong with getting a manual and following it. I'm not an expert. This is how I do it. It works for me. It's not exactly how the manual does it, but it works for me. I appreciate you guys watching. Got any comments, suggestions, something you want to see about this bike? Leave a comment below. I'll get back to you. And thanks for watching.